Welcome to the Christian Atheist, where faith and reason fuse in the incarnation. Episode number 147, The Content of a Scientific Revolution, Part 1. In 1859, Charles Darwin wrote in the famous Origin of Species, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. But I can find no such case." No, perhaps Darwin could not. He knew of no such case. Nor, perhaps, did scientific investigations for about a century afterward. In other words, behind the veil of what we did not know, Darwin's theory could flourish, gain converts, and propagate unrefuted. The theory could expand its explanatory mechanisms, engage the best and the brightest minds to elaborate its theoretical grasp, and achieve a near universal acceptance. It is a compelling, rational story behind the veil of ignorance. It is now 2024, 165 years after Darwin set down his criterion of falsifiability. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. If we apply this falsification criterion in the light of today's scientific evidence, can Darwin's theory stand? We know a great deal more today than we did in 1859, after all. How does evolutionary theory fare when science applies Darwin's falsification test, having penetrated that veil of ignorance? As it turns out, increasingly poorly. It is no longer a matter of finding a complex organ which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications. Life itself, in all its variety, is such a complex, as are any number of systems, subsystems, and even the individual components or organs of which they consist. 21st century scientific evidence makes the case, and makes it irrefutably, that life is too complex to have evolved by numerous successive slight modifications. If many scientists, and even the scientific community at large, has not yet faced this conclusion, it is not because they are ignorant of the evidence, though that too is part of the problem, but because they have so profoundly embraced the veil of ignorance within which the theory flourished. They cannot now see or accept any other way of conceiving it. As philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn would say, abandoning an accepted working theory, or paradigm, is seldom, if ever, simply a matter of bowing to the evidence. That is not how human science works, no matter how we idealize it. We are now in what Kuhn called a period of crisis science, in which the cracks between theory and reality grow ever wider. All the while, the vast body of scientists and the scientific community simply continues to operate and act within the normal science framework. In effect, they ignore the evidence in favor of the rationalized picture that has contextualized their understanding of evidence throughout their professional careers. Embracing a new paradigm is a matter of repentance, of a turning from and a turning to. It is, that is, a matter of faith, which most scientists today will tell you they don't have. And however ironic it may be to say it, they believe that. It is because they believe so strongly that it does not appear to them to be faith at all. Just a knowing to which reality itself must conform. This sort of unconscious faith functions as a suppressor of questions about itself as faith. It is, as we have sometimes called it, a retreat into certainty, into dogma. It is this knowing that allows only the local question of, how does this evidence fit into the structure I know? And almost never allowing the global question of, does this evidence falsify what I think I know? Why has Darwin's falsifiability criterion not falsified evolutionary theory? It is most certainly not because there is no evidence of any organ that could not plausibly have come about by numerous successive slight modifications. It is not, that is, because evidence for falsification is absent, as it was in Darwin's day, but because evolutionary scientists simply will not apply the falsification criterion to evolutionary theory. Whatever evidence we have, instead, must be conformed to the theory. This is what Kuhn calls normal science. Normal science proceeds by tweaking our understanding of reality to make evidence fit the theory. So long as normal science rules the community, evolutionary theory cannot be falsified. Philosopher of science Karl Popper proposed that unfalsifiable theories are, by definition, unscientific. And while many in the scientific community freely use Popper's view to disqualify theistic science, they will not apply it to their own house. This attitude is so explicit that Richard Dawkins simply tells us, straightforwardly and without embarrassment, that certain evidence has little or nothing to do with the study of biology. Quote, "Biology is the study of complex things that seem to have been designed for a purpose." And of course, the emphasis here is on the word seems. For it is precisely this seeming, this evidence, that must be denied at all costs. We need not wonder that the overwhelming evidence of design in nature is denied by materialist science and atheists, as by their very own statements of credo, I believe. They exclude the possibility of falsification of their beliefs by any sort of evidence whatsoever. Dawkins is not here different from those who share the orthodoxy, but only at this moment more honest. The appearance of design does not often occur in their speaking or writing, because it does not come to mind by conscious, habitual exclusion, by a chosen blind spot. In ignorance, that is, before the veil of unknowing was lifted, evolutionary theory was plausible. Like the pre-Socratic philosophers, if you start with the assumption of reductionism, everything complex is merely a combination of what is less complex. all the way down to the simple elements of which all things are composed. In nature, complexity comes from the simple, right? To understand the world, then, it will suffice to reduce things to their simplest components and plausibly tell a story of how the simple becomes the complex. This is the rational basis of evolutionary theory in a nutshell. Nor was it novel when Darwin made it fashionable. The Greeks had proposed the idea 2.5 millennia before. It implies that complexity evolves from simplicity. In Darwinian biology, therefore, more complex life comes from less complex life. And this implies that simple life came from non-life. Single-celled organisms must then be simple life, sprung spontaneously from its inorganic environment. Single-celled organisms must be the simple seed from which all organisms evolved, with man at the pinnacle of the long, long history of natural evolution. And it has to be an inconceivably long history for evolution to be plausible. For rational human beings to entertain the notion that humanity evolved from a single-celled organism by numerous successive slight modifications in anything less than astronomical time. Thus, the hand-waving and incantatory magical formula of deep time became not just a possibility, but an ideological necessity, an indispensable dogma, not just for biology, but for all of science, that slowly but inexorably became colonized by it. Evolutionists have become as dogmatic and certain in their faith that evolution did it, that all evidence can be made to fit the theory, as is the simplest of Christians in his Creator. Christians will say, God did it. But at least they, from the least informed child to the most academically rigorous and up-to-date scientist, have based their theory on that which all parties admit is evident to the rational mind. The world seems designed. And they will refuse to place their faith in an arbitrary denial of that which is rationally evident. Who is more objective and unbiased? I am a Christian, with the searching and skeptical mind of an atheist. I don't want to believe anything that isn't true. I know both sides of the looking glass, and I know them with open eyes. I choose Christ's side. I invite you to join me from wherever you stand before the looking glass. That's this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and remember, you can have your religious cake and eat it too. You can have reason, respect for science, a 21st century worldview, and be a Christian.